registered. We're going to be live now. And now we are going to screen share, and Xava will introduce herself.
Okay, so I got my start as a Jewish teacher, creating a beit midrash in Washington State prisons, teaching incarcerated Jewish people all over Washington State. And that's how I got started doing things like this. I am the co-host of the very first ever in the world Queer Talmud podcast, which is called Hi, How Are You? You can see the title there in the slide if you want to go take a listen. And I'm also the co-founder of Shel Maala, which is an all-online yeshiva community that works to learn Talmud together in the Svara style, which is sort of a queer Talmud style. And sometimes I write poems, and also teaching Talmud is the main thing that I do. My main employment is the podcast and teaching for Shel Maala. So that's a little bit about me.
Hi, everyone. I am Rabbi Rachel Zerin. I'm the assistant rabbi at Temple Emanu-El in Providence. I fell in love with Talmud study during a summer program at the conservative yeshiva. I went for 3 weeks and then canceled all my other travel plans for the summer, stayed for 5, went back for the next year, and have been hooked ever since. I was ordained and also got my master's in Talmud study from the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. That was in 2015 and early 2016. And then I've been here since 2016. I love helping people connect with and find deeper meaning in Jewish texts, rituals, and traditions. And I'm really, really excited for tonight and the beit midrash that we'll be doing after this, which we'll talk about at the end, as one of the ways to help people access text in the original.
Cool. So in the learning tradition that I come from, and in many other Jewish learning traditions, we dedicate our learning before we start to learn. So this time is an opportunity to dedicate your learning this evening. And what we'll do is, if there's anyone to whom you want to dedicate the blessing, the bracha of your learning here today, you can share a dedication for them in the chat. So it might be that you want to dedicate your learning towards their healing, their refuah shlema, or you might want to dedicate towards their memory. Really can be towards anything. So we're just going to take a minute or two of silence to give people an opportunity to drop their dedications in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for your dedications. And now we'll pass it over to Rachel for the bracha for learning.
So this evening and every opportunity that we have to learn is not only an opportunity to learn, but also to engage in a mitzvah, and we bless that opportunity. You are all muted, which means we can all speak together and enjoy seeing each other's mouths moved in shared blessing. Even if we can't hear each other's voices, Zoom does not do well with multiple voices speaking at once. So I invite you to read with me or to give a hearty amen at the end. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, whose presence fills the world, who sanctifies us with mitzvot, inviting us to engage with words of Torah. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So we are here to learn about what is the Mishnah, how do we learn it, why do we learn it? And we're going to start with the first part. What is the Mishnah? The Mishnah is a record of statements by, debates between, and stories of the Tannaitic rabbis. It defies any genre that we are used to today. It is a genre in and of its own that is a collection of all these different things. It's chronologically the earliest layer of Talmudic material, also making it the earliest layer of what we call rabbinic literature or rabbinic material. So when we talk about the rabbis, we're talking about the rabbis, starting with the rabbis of the Mishnah, and going through several centuries, usually through the rabbis of the Talmud, sometimes through one more era there. Unlike Talmud, Mishnah is mostly written in Hebrew, which makes it a great text to start with if you're kind of doing your first taste of learning in the original language. Traditionally, we say that it's redacted by Yehuda Hanassi around the year 200 CE, though academically there are all sorts of discussions and debates about what may have happened. And the Mishnah is a document on its own, a set of books on its own. It also serves as the foundation of the Gemara or the Talmud. Those are two different names for the same thing. And in that the Talmud will quote a section of Mishnah and then expand upon it, and then quote a next section of Mishnah and expand upon it, and so on. Ideologically, the Mishnah is also the foundation or the record of the foundation of post-Temple Judaism. So prior to the Rabbinic period, the primary way of being Jewish was offering sacrifices at the temple. When the temple was destroyed, that was no longer an option for how to worship. And so Judaism had to be sort of reinvented. And the Mishnah is the earliest layer we have of how Judaism was reinvented into more or less what we know today. It's not a halachic code, right? A halachic is the word for legal, for Jewish law. It's not a Jewish legal code because it's a mishmash of things, right? It's statements, debates, and stories. But it is a model of halachic thinking, and it gives us sort of a glimpse into how Jewish law begins to formulate and how the origins of how it evolves into today. I see a bunch of questions in the chat, so give me a minute to. Oh, Xava's been.
Oh yeah, I'm tending to the chat. I didn't say that, but I put in the chat. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll try to attend to them. And if I can't answer them, then I'll bring them up, and Rachel and I will talk about them together.
Perfect. I've gotten a little bit better at reading and speaking at the same time, different things, but I'm still not great at it. So that's excellent. All right, I'm going to keep going. I love this. Mishmash is more like mishnash. That's fabulous. Okay. What is the Mishnah continued? All right, let's talk about format for a minute. The Mishnah has 6 orders, is what we call them in English. In Hebrew, we would call them 6 seders, 6 sedarim. Those 6 are Zeraim, which literally translates to seeds, Moed or festivals, Nashim or women, Nezikin or damages, Kodashim or sacred things, Tahara or ritual purity. And usually if you buy or find a Hebrew set of Mishnah, it will come in 6 volumes, 1 volume for each seder, each order. Each order is broken down. Oh, actually, there's a step missing here. Each order is broken down into masechtot, tractates. We'll update the presentation before we send it. Oh, and I should say we are going to send out the slides at the end of this, so don't worry yourself with taking notes on all of this. If it's on the screen, you'll get it. Each order is broken down into masechtot, or tractates. So in Moed, the Seder of festivals, you have a tractate on Shabbat, you have a tractate on Passover, you have a tractate on Megillah, which is a combination of Purim and other things. You have a tractate on Sukkah, etc. Each tractate or masechet is broken down into chapters, and each chapter is broken down into mishnayot, which is the plural. The singular is mishnah. So when you're studying, you might say, oh, I'm reading Pesachim, chapter 1, mishnah 3, right? And so you go to chapter 1 and then the third paragraph or third section. We are focused on Mishnah, but it's hard to talk about Mishnah and not mention Talmud at all. So the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud are both expansions of the Mishnah. I mentioned earlier, they'll take a paragraph of Mishnah and then expand upon it. Both of them go through much of the Mishnah, though neither one goes through the entirety of the Mishnah. And there are some places where there might be Talmud on one and not the other, meaning that there might be Babylonian Talmud on one section and not Jerusalem Talmud, or vice versa. If that was confusing, you have two options. Don't worry about it, or the Wikipedia pages on this have some nice charts, and you can all Google that and find those charts on your own. All right.
Before we go on, Rachel, I want to defer a question to you, which is Ruth asks in the chat, what does the word Mishnah mean outside this context?
Great question. So Mishnah comes from the root of shana, which is a word that you're probably somewhat familiar with in this season when we say Shana Tova, and it is a little bit connected. The root for Shana has to do with cycle. And when the Mishnah was named, learning was done through repetition, through memorization. So someone who learned something was someone who repeated it over and over and over and over until they had memorized it. So Mishnah basically means learning, but it has these connotations of learning in repetitious cycles.
Great. Okay, my slide time. Why study the Mishnah? Do you mind giving me some clicks and then I forgot that all these animations were in here, so we're just gonna have to enjoy that. So why might we want to study the Mishnah is an important question we all sort of have to address for ourselves. One really popular reason, and one reason I think is really great, is because we can discover the foundations of our contemporary practice, things that we recognize from our own Jewish lives. We can discover their foundations in the Mishnah. For instance, we're going to be having a Mishnah beit midrash that starts next week, where we're going to be studying the Mishnah of Pesachim, which is the Mishnah of Pesach, and we'll explore things like the origins of our practices around chametz, or the origins of our practices around the Seder. So studying Mishnah can be a way to discover where those practices stem from for yourself. It can also be a way for us to see how Judaism has evolved over the past 1800 or so years, because sometimes you study Mishnah and you see something stated that might not be what you're used to in your own practice. So we can explore the ways that our own contemporary Jewish practices are not necessarily exactly the same as what was happening in the Mishnaic time. And one that's really near and dear to my heart is that we can use Mishnah study to explore the Rabbinic mindset. So when we're reading the Mishnah, we're reading a record of the conversations between the rabbis in the Mishnaic period. So that's an opportunity for us to see what was important to them. What were their values? How did they conduct their arguments? What did they consider appropriate proof of a logical point? It's a way for us to sort of be in the shoes of the rabbis who shape so much about our Jewish world and explore what they might have been thinking as they sort of built those foundations. it is, when we study Mishnah and also when we study Talmud, it's an opportunity to train our minds to think halachically. So what I mean by this, halacha being the word for Jewish law, there's this great phrase, which I think Daniel Boyarin introduced, which is the concept of creating a usable past. So when we study the Talmud or the Mishnah, which is our past, we begin to embody the practice of figuring out ways to use that past in our lives. We're discovering, what does this text have to say to me? How is it meaningful in my life? And we also explore our history, not just from a perspective of learning facts that are told to us by a teacher, but by digging it up for ourselves and discovering for ourselves what is important, what is relevant. And then a reason that's totally off on a different path is that studying Mishnah and studying Talmud is also about building relationships, because the Talmud and Mishnah are traditionally studied in what we call xevruta, in a paired learning relationship. So not only are you exploring your own relationship with your Jewish past, with the foundations of Judaism, with your history, you're also using the text as a bridge to build a relationship between yourself and your xevruta. The text becomes sort of the medium by which you two are able to connect with each other. And I know from personal experience, I've had profound conversations that I never would have had otherwise, because of just a random quirk of the text that came up between me and my xevruta. So studying text together creates these beautiful opportunities to deepen our relationships with each other. And that's what I have to say about why to study the Mishnah. Oh, even more I have to say. There's this great concept, which luckily I now see at the bottom of the screen, that in traditional Talmud study, we have almost a completely different model of pedagogy, of learning and teaching than we might be used to in America and the West, which is that rather than trying to be the individual who accumulates the most information and is the smartest, the success of our learning when we're learning Mishnah is measured cooperatively. So when you study in xevruta, you know you've been successful when your partner understands the text. And they know they've been successful when you understand the text. When you come to the understanding together, that's what successful xevruta learning looks like. And the beit midrash, which is sort of like made up of all these xevruta pairs, is a place where we all work together to come to an understanding collaboratively, which is totally different than the kind of classroom style learning that we're used to. It's a totally different way of thinking about knowledge and how to acquire it. And I just think that's awesome. So now we're going to do a little small group exercise. So we are going to send you into breakout rooms of maybe 2 or 3 people apiece. And what we're hoping you'll do in this breakout room is that you'll use this time to discuss why you might be interested in learning Mishnah, what brought you to this class, and why might you be interested in learning in the Mishnah. So this is an opportunity sort of to experience a mini xevruta where we build relationships with each other based on that. Let's see, is there anything else I need to say about small groups? Anything you think, Rachel?
I don't think so. I think I do need to stop the screen share in order to send us into breakout rooms. Blau, I did see your question. I will answer it after I attend to the breakout rooms. So we are going to go ahead and create we are going to create 8 breakout rooms. and you will see your invitation now, hopefully.
Great. Okay, here we go.
I'm okay. So if you can accept your breakout room invitation, you should have gotten an invitation and you can accept it. I see. Oh, everyone. Hi. Is there, you're muted. Oh, there you go. Is everything, how's everything going?
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, I left the breakout room because it didn't seem like the other person in it could see or hear me.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's try moving you to an active breakout room. How does that sound?
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to move you in with Xava because I know that will work. And I'll try moving Irving as well.
Okay, thanks.
Did you get a new invitation?
I did not yet, I think.
Oh dear. Well, why don't we chat then? So why would you learn Mishnah? Or what brings you here tonight? Either way.
Well, what brings me here tonight specifically was that another friend of mine who's not here tonight but is going to be doing the longer Mishnah course invited me because she wanted to study together. I've done this kind of study before and I've really enjoyed it. I did it with Svara last year during a Hanukkah thing they were doing in Philly. But I'm slightly concerned because I tend to find Zoom very draining and hard to pay attention to the way I would to an in-person conversation. So tonight I'm just trying to get reaccustomed to Zoom because I've been avoiding it for a while so that I can hang in there for the rest of all this.
I hear that. Sarah, welcome. Rachel, welcome back. I'm trying to juggle a few different things here. Aoife, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're giving it a try. I'll say that we are trying to kind of vary the type of presentations so that it's not all us talking at you, although tonight is more of that than otherwise. Sarah, we were just having conversations about why we study Mishnah as individuals, or what brings us here. So people are mostly in breakout rooms, which I actually think I need to let people know. I need to give them the 1 minute warning. Otherwise, we're gonna get too off time.
Sure. Sorry about that. I lost internet briefly, so.
Oh, wait, you were here.
I was.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, welcome back then.
Thank you.
Sorry for the recap that you didn't need.
No worries.
I mean, I helped Xava make the slides, so why I study Mishnah, you guys already kind of know. But Aoife, I'm sorry that our xevruta is now turning into I'm not even sure what you call a xevruta of 5, a group fruta. But I would say that for me, it's about anchoring myself in the tradition and becoming a part of it, right? Becoming another voice in it. That's my kind of one sentence answer as we start to welcome people back. All right, I think if I close them, they get a 60-second warning. So we're going to do that. Welcome back, everyone. It's always nice to see the room repopulated. I hope everyone had enough time for people to talk.
I mean, I feel like I could talk about Mishnah forever, but
True. Very true.
Interpretations through the ages of the phenomenon too.
Welcome back, everyone. I think the breakout rooms have officially been closed and you've all been booted back into the main room. So Bruchim Habaim, welcome. Let me bring up the screen share for the presentation again. And here we go. Why study Mishnah in this way? So I realize this is a little bit of a roundabout slide because we haven't told you what way are we studying. But basically what I want to talk about is why bother studying in Hebrew when there are so many wonderful translations out there nowadays, and what's the value of a slow and careful read? Going so slowly that you feel like you've never studied this slowly in your life before. And actually, through this, I also want to answer the question that I've lost my chat.
oh, I think it was Maim that asked the last question.
Thank you. The question that Maim asked, can you study Mishnah if you haven't really fully studied Torah, or do you need to really comprehend Torah before studying Mishnah? I would say yes and yes to that, and it ties in with my answer about the value of studying in Hebrew. So you can absolutely study Mishnah before having fully studied through and grasped all of Torah. As long as you're willing to learn Torah along the way and engage in the rabbinic enterprise of the value of Torah. So what I mean by that is that for the rabbis of the Mishnah, Torah is the foundation of everything, and every word of Torah has value. And so what they say in the Mishnah and also in the Talmud is often based in very close, careful readings of the Hebrew of the Torah. So if you're willing to kind of engage in that with them, even if you're not already familiar with the Torah, and to become familiar with the Torah on the way, then you can certainly dive right into Mishnah. If you have a background in Torah, that will change your reading. It'll give you context, but it will also keep you from reading it with fresh eyes and reading it with the rabbinic interpretation. So there are benefits to both. Why study in Hebrew? So first of all, every translation is an interpretation. This is true for any kind of writing. Pick any great classic in any language. If you read it in English, you're reading an interpretation of it. So studying in Hebrew enables us to access the original text with fresh eyes and interpret it for ourselves rather than reading someone else's interpretation, which is really important, especially because different people might have different goals in why they study Mishnah, and those goals can show through in those interpretations. The next two pieces have to do with what I was talking about just now, which is that the rabbis really loved language and drew on language and played with language. So the language of the rabbis is the language of allusion. That's allusion with an A, where one word might allude to, for example, an entire biblical story. That's where familiarity with the Bible might be helpful. If you don't have that familiarity with the Torah, then that means that when that word is alluded to, you just go and look up that story and you read that story in that moment in your xevruta to get the context. But the language of the rabbis is the language of allusion. And that allusion only makes sense if you're reading it in the original language, because one word in English might not allude to anything if it's a commonplace English word. But if that Hebrew word is only used in a couple places in the Torah, then it's a big, bright flashing light that says, I'm pointing you to something somewhere else. And so that's one of the reasons that studying in the original Hebrew can be so valuable. The other is that the rabbis were master punsters. They loved wordplay. And if you've ever tried to translate a joke, you know that jokes don't translate well. Puns translate even worse. And so to understand and appreciate the wordplay that they engage in, the sacred wordplay that they engage in, you can best access that by studying in Hebrew. And what's the value of a slow, careful read, of carefully looking at every single word? I think the Talmud says it best when it says, one who reviews one's studies 100 times is not even similar to one who reviews them 101 times. The more slowly, the more carefully we go, the more we notice, the more we learn, the more we get out of the text. So a deep, slow, careful read allows us to notice more, ask more questions, and embody the text in a way that a quicker read couldn't.
Cool. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual methodology that we use to study Mishnah. And this is the same routine that you would use to study Gemara or Talmud as well. And I'll preface it by saying this is the sort of series of steps that we use in my tradition. You may find other things that work for you, but I think this is a really great framework. So the first step, really this whole process is a circle, but for our purposes, the first step is called prep. So during the prep step of studying the Mishnah, you and your xevruta read whatever text you're studying word by word until you both understand every word you've read. So this means if you find a word you don't know, looking it up in a dictionary, finding its Hebrew root, figuring out what part of speech it is, figuring out what binyan it's in, if it's a verb, what tense it's in. You just want to go along with your xevruta and pick apart every little piece of the text. This is sort of a granular step. This is where you get all the little pieces before you put them together to make the puzzle. And when you do this prep step, you make what's called an inside translation first. So an inside translation is a translation that accounts for every letter, every mark of the words on the page. So when we do an inside translation of Hebrew, it oftentimes comes out sounding like complete nonsense because Hebrew grammar and Hebrew word meaning is really, really different than English word meaning and English grammar. So it's important to create a translation that first shows the meaning of every word on the page. And then we move from that translation to an outside translation, which is one that makes sense to us as a sentence, that makes sense in English grammar, that makes sense in the English understanding of words. And that's what it looks like to prep. So after you and your xevruta have prepped, oh, is this really the order they're in? Huh. Sorry, 1 second, everyone.
Should I go back?
You know, let's just press on. Let's press on. Let's go through the Chazarah slide. So after you've prepped, this is a time to do Chazarah or review. So when you're doing Chazarah, there's going to be a person A and a person B in your xevruta. Or if you're studying with 3 people, you might have A, B, and C. So when you're doing review, the steps are first, person A reads out the text in its original, in the original Hebrew or Aramaic, whatever it's in, without any translation. Then person A reads aloud their own inside translation the way that they chose to translate each and every word and letter, even if it doesn't make sense in English. And finally, they read their own outside translation that they created themselves, which is the translation that makes sense in English with English grammar. And then you repeat this process. So going back, you go to person B, and person B reads through it and gives their translations. And there's an optional step here. So in what we might call traditional Talmud study, it's very common for people to work to commit Talmudic passages to memory. So if you are studying in that way and working on committing the passage to memory, this is an opportunity for you and your xevruta to practice reciting your passage from memory that you're trying to memorize. And finally, we come to the part where the circle comes back around, which is a shiur, which is like a Talmudic lecture. So shiur is the time where we all come together, all the xevrutas and the beit midrash come together to discuss, and the teacher facilitates that discussion and that learning. So sometimes I've been in a situation where xevruta and I weren't studying with the beit midrash, we were just studying on our own. So we would just have our own little shiur where we kibitz and chat and talk about the larger implications of the text. Sometimes we would use a translation to check ourselves and make sure we got everything in our picking apart of all those words and phrases. And there are tons of Talmud shiurim online for free. So if you study some Mishnah or some Talmud with your xevruta, you can probably go online and look up that Mishnah or that page of Talmud and find a recorded talk about it, which can sort of serve as your shiur. But when we study together in a beit midrash setting, this is when all the xevrutas come back together and the teacher sort of explains their understanding of the text. And we check that against the xevruta's understanding of the text to make sure that we're all coming to a place of a shared understanding, a shared comprehension of the text that we're working on. And then the whole process begins again. So when you move on to the next part of the text, again, you review what you've learned before, you prepare what you're going to learn again, and you go back to shiur. Just always moving between reviewing what we've learned before, learning something new, and going back to shiur. Just continuing in that circle, because the process of Mishnaic or Talmudic learning is never done. We never finish. We are always sort of on a learning journey together. A lot of people use the metaphor of the spiral. If you see a spiral, like spiraling upward, even though you're coming back to the same place on the outline of the circle, you're still making progress upward. So we may study the same words hundreds and hundreds of times, but each time we study them, we are having a fresh experience of that text. So I think I might be good to have a question break. So that was a lot of talk about methodology. Does anyone have any questions about that process? You can either put your questions in the chat, or if you want to, you can just unmute yourself and say your question.
And I'm sorry that I fell behind on the chat. It stopped showing up for me.
Oh.
So there's some catch up.
I had a question.
Sure.
When you're talking about sort of studying word by word and then moving on to the next bit, I know this might vary sort of from xevruta to xevruta, but how big of a section do people tend to learn at a time? Is it sort of a paragraph or a whole page, or?
That's a good question. It really depends on the style of learning that you're going for. I've been in xevrutas where we sat down and we studied for an hour and we only studied 4 words because there was just that much juicy content in those 4 words for us to argue about. And I've also been in xevrutas where we read a whole page of Talmud, like a daf yomi, where we just zipped right through it. So a lot of it depends on your preference for the level of depth that you want to get into. Usually in the beit midrashes that I'm used to being in, we study about a sentence per xevruta. So maybe like 10 words, 20 words, something like that. It really just depends on where you're trying to go with your learning.
Thank you.
Yeah. Azaria asked in the chat, why is shiur after chazara in this setting? I'm used to seeing them flipped. Yes. So in the Svara method, we usually review if we had something previous learned, prep, and then shiur, and then go back to review. I believe I put the slides in the wrong order in this case. And also I was thinking through my own personal experience of what it was like to be in a shiur. So yeah, so that's my bad. And I'll fix it before we send the slides out to you. We all have COVID brain a little bit right now. So yes, the order, which I'm going to put in the chat now, which I prefer, is chazara, prep, shiur, repeat. So if you don't have anything to review, then you don't do the chazara step and you go right to prep. And if you do have something to review, then you do the chazara step and come right back around. So I hope that answers your question, Azaria.
There was also a question about what the outside translation is. So I hope this is okay, Xava. I thought it might actually be helpful to show one of the inside and outside translations. I'm specifically picking one that the beit midrash won't get to for a few weeks, so that it won't tip you off too much. But here's an example. So the Hebrew, which we have, sorry, there we go. Actually, no, let's do one step at a time. The Hebrew, which we have also in transliteration here, Ein chosheshin shema gerara chulda mi beit lebeit umi makom lamakom. So if you would translate word to word, Ein means not. Chosheshin means they worry. Shema means perhaps. Now, if I was really doing this in xevruta, I'm not going to take up this much of your time, but I would be looking up these words and I would be going through the grammar, right? And chashash means worry, but when you put the yud nun at the end, it means they, plural, masculine, or plural combination of genders. Right, I would be going through all the grammar. I would be going through all the looking up. I'm doing a very, very kind of fast-forwarded version right now. So the inside translation, you take each word in order and translate. Girara, drag. Chulda is a rat or a weasel. Right, and sometimes even looking it up in a dictionary, you don't get a clear answer, and so you have 2 different possibilities. Mi beit, from house, le beit, to house, umi makom, and from place, le makom, to place. So that's an exact literal translation. That's what we would call an inside translation. But if I ever said to you, not they worry, perhaps drag rat weasel from house to house, you would look at me like I did not know how to speak English, because that isn't really English. So after making the inside translation, you then turn it into a normal English sentence, right? How people speak. They don't need to be concerned that a rat might drag chametz between houses. So you put in some of the context, and that's some of what's in the parentheses and also the word chametz. You wouldn't know except for the context, but you also rearrange the word order, right? Not they worry perhaps becomes they don't need to be concerned. And you can see how one becomes the other, right? Not they worry perhaps means they don't need to be concerned. But when you're doing the careful dictionary work of translating from word to word, you can't get directly to the outside translation. You have to go to the inside translation first. Xava, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think the only thing I want to add is that when you're in that inside translation phase, that's oftentimes when xevruta really shines, because we might read the word shema and Rachel would say it means perhaps, and then I would say, where'd you get that? What's your source for that? And then we would both go into the dictionary so that we're both at the same level of understanding. So that's where the play back and forth really comes out.
Excellent. All
Cool.
right.
I guess
Any
we're ready
other
to continue our
questions
journey.
up till now? We have more. All right. Well, we were talking about dictionaries, but what dictionaries? What do you use and how do you use it? We live in an incredible age when there are a plethora of resources available, both in print and many online. So I'm going to show you a few, and then Xava is going to make this slide irrelevant because she's going to show you the resource of all resources. I have some show and tell. So the Mishnah is written in Hebrew, but it is written in Rabbinic Hebrew. A modern Hebrew dictionary will sometimes get you the right translations, but more often than not will mislead you. Because as you can imagine, over 1800 years, a language evolves and changes. It would be like trying to understand Shakespeare with a Webster's dictionary. It doesn't quite work, but then, add another 1,000 years plus. So we do have a go-to dictionary of Talmudic Hebrew, but mostly it works for Mishnaic Hebrew as well. And that is this first resource here, Jastro. There is an online version here where you can kind of, if Hulda was in the example, so I could click on Chet and then scroll down. One of the tricks is to know whether you're looking up just the root of a word, the 3-letter root, or whether you're looking up the whole word. A good way to start is to look up the whole word. And then if that doesn't work, try and figure out the root. That's always kind of a safe bet. So hulda would presumably be right around here. And here's where choices come in, right? Oh, a hulda, a back gate, or a mule driver's gate. Nope, that was not what we were talking about. Oh, a mole, weasel, or porcupine. That sounds right. Okay, so that is how that works there. This is just a scan of this book. And there's a link here to purchase it if you so choose. There are, and that will cover kind of what any standard dictionary will cover. There's also a lot of technical terms where a literal translation won't get you far enough, because the literal translation is not going to explain the full meaning of the term. So for those kinds of words, we have this, which is Frank's Practical Talmud Dictionary. Mostly we just call this a Frank. Right? Pass me the Frank. That's what you say in the beit midrash. And so this will define technical terms beyond their literal meaning. So here I just opened to a random page because I didn't think ahead enough to look for good examples. All right, buke srike literally means empty vessels, but it refers to absurd opinions. Right? So the meaning isn't really the dictionary definition. It has a much broader meaning. And Frank will give you that. The nice thing about Frank is that he also will give you a longer explanation, and almost always, almost always, he'll give you an example or two from the Mishnah or Talmud of how it's used. So this is obviously a much smaller book. It's not comprehensive, but it includes all the technical terms. There are also some really helpful guides in the back, things like here are all your cardinal and ordinal numbers and fractions in various dialects, genders, and yes, dialects and genders. Those were the options. Sorry. There's some measurement guides, right, that will not only tell you what they are, but tell you the equivalents to contemporary measurements, things like that. So those kind of last 20 pages are really helpful also. Another technical kind of reference guide that's really helpful is the Steinsaltz reference guide to the Talmud. This is an old edition. The newer edition it's more the size of this book. Looks very different. But this also has technical terms. It also has more substantive information about things like measurements, money, other kind of halachic concepts, defining all of the sacrifices and different watches of the temple, things like that. So if there's ever a time when you look up a word in the dictionary and you know the translation, but you still don't know what the thing means, this or this will be your friend. These come more in handy with Talmud study than Mishnah study, but they're still good to know about. In terms of other resources beyond dictionaries and reference guides, there are a lot of resources out there, as Xava mentioned. One in particular that I want to recommend is the conservative yeshiva's Mishnah Yomit. Mishnah Yomit just means Mishnah a day. They have daily emails and a full archive. And this is kind of like a shiur that you can do on your own. So if you go to, I didn't realize there was so many clicks. Sorry, guys. I just wanted to show you one example. If you go to the archives, you'll see that it will give you an introduction, a translation, and an explanation, kind of step by step, just a couple pages. They're all 1 to 3 pages long for each Mishnah. And you can subscribe to the emails or you can work through the archives. And if you're looking for self-guided study that's not a podcast, I think this is one of the best materials out there. If you want the full Hebrew text on your phone or tablet, the Kahati app is a great resource. But the resource of all resources is Sefaria. And for that, I'm going to let Xava take the reins.
Okay. So I am going to show you a little bit about this incredible, wonderful gift of a website that we have called Sefaria. If my browser would let me. There we go. Okay, so this is the homepage of Sefaria, which is an incredible library of Jewish texts. The name is spelled Sefaria. They have just about everything you could ever want on this site. They have all these midrashes. They have stuff you would expect, like the Tanakh. They have the Mishnah. Just almost any Jewish text you could want to read, you can find for free right here on Sefaria, which is a free website. So that alone is incredible. So now I'm going to show you a little bit about the tools. So we're just going to go to the first chapter of Bereshit to look at that. So this is what it looks like when you look at a text on Sefaria. So right now I have it showing me the English and the Hebrew at the same time. If I wanted to see only the Hebrew, I could go up to this little language button on the right and change it to show me only Hebrew. I could change it to be only English. I could change it to show me where the aliyot are for Torah reading. Could just do all kinds of incredible things. So that's what it looks like when you look at a text. And there are a couple tools that make it stand out even more. So you can click on one of these blocks of text and it will bring up a toolbar on the right. On this toolbar, you can find the commentaries on this verse. which is awesome. You can find things like where it's referenced in Mishnah, where it's referenced in Talmud, where it's been referenced in midrash. So everywhere else that this verse appears in all the text Sefaria has on their website, you can directly connect to it right here, which is incredible. And they have this awesome little tab down at the bottom of the resources menu called Dictionaries. So if you click on Dictionaries and then highlight a word, so for instance, right here, I'm going to highlight the word bara, it will automatically look up that word for you in the dictionary and show you the definitions of that word. And it pulls from a couple different dictionaries. It definitely pulls from Jastro. It also pulls from the Klein Dictionary, which I really don't know anything about. And you can do this with every word. And more often than not, it'll pull up a meaning. Sometimes there will be words where you need to find the root. So for instance, let's see. Bereshit is a pretty popular word, but we might want to find, we might want to go down to a more narrow level than this entire word, which does have its own entry in the Jastro dictionary. So we could try, if we didn't know what our root was, highlighting the different parts of this word to see if we could get some other related dictionary entries here. So here we find our Hebrew root, Resh Aleph Shin, meaning head, top, summit, beginning. So this dictionary tool is really incredible because you can be right here studying your text and you don't even have to get out a paper book. It's just all right there. And within this dictionary tool, a lot of other things are also linked. So for instance, in the Jastro dictionary, it often has examples from the Talmud where words or roots are used. And you can just click right on those examples and it'll bring up the Talmudic page that Jastro is referencing. So truly just an incredible tool. I can't talk about it enough. It's changed my life. And the second most incredible tool I want to tell you about, which you'll definitely want to use if you are in our Mishnah beit midrash, they recently added this feature called xevruta. So you can just click xevruta and it will start a call for you, a video call right here in the text, right on the website. So if I wanted to invite my xevruta to come study this text with me, I could just select this link right here and send it to them, and we would be able to have a video chat right here inside Sefaria with all of our resources in front of us, everything just integrated into one place. So that's just about the coolest thing I've ever seen. It is just incredible. I really hope you all get some use out of it. I can't see the chat right now, but if anyone has any questions, or Rachel, if you want to read me any questions about Sefaria, I'd be happy to answer some, if there are any.
If people have questions, feel free to add them. Mostly there's just praise for Sefaria, which does keep adding features on a regular basis. So 6 months from now, there will be new things that I'm sure there will be new things that we didn't talk about tonight. It's really just an incredible program that has changed access to Jewish learning. It's amazing. Any questions about either Sefaria or the other resources? I will say that even just learning how to learn is a whole process. Learning how to use the dictionaries. Now, I feel so old saying this. When I was a new beit midrash student, we did not have Sefaria at all, let alone integrated dictionaries. And so it was very different, but it is really a process. All right, we've got a couple of questions. How similar is Talmudic Hebrew to Rabbinic Hebrew? Great question. Talmudic Hebrew and Rabbinic Hebrew are basically interchangeable terms. If you are on the level of getting a PhD in linguistics, there are some subtle differences depending on which era of the rabbis you're talking about. The one big thing to know is that the Talmud is mostly written in Aramaic with some Hebrew. So when we talk about Rabbinic Hebrew, we're mostly talking about the Mishnah, not so much Talmud. And we have kind of an additional question onto that. Can you use the same dictionaries for Talmudic, Rabbinic, and Biblical Hebrew? So Talmudic and Rabbinic, yes. Biblical Hebrew is its own third dialect. That's the word I'm looking for. Biblical Hebrew kind of has its own dialect, some of its own vocabulary, certainly its own grammatical rules. There is a go-to biblical dictionary, which I accidentally grabbed off my shelf, but now it's convenient, called the Brown Driver Briggs Dictionary. That's also available online in scanned format, colloquially called the BDB for Brown Driver and Briggs, but those were actually the three gentlemen who wrote this dictionary. The one tricky thing is that the rabbis allude to and quote the Bible. So even though biblical and Mishnaic Hebrew are different, the rabbis sometimes use biblical Hebrew. And sometimes what you have to puzzle out is, are they using a rabbinic Hebrew word here that might mean X, or are they using a biblical Hebrew word here that might mean Y? And that's when you really get to lean into your xevruta and kind of play out, well, if it means this, then does the sentence make sense? If it means that, does the sentence make sense? How does this all hold together? Okay. We have another question. When I try to use Sefaria, I get a little overwhelmed with how many options there are linked to the different verses. How do you narrow it down to decide which resources to look at for this kind of study? Like there's 401 pieces of commentary for one verse. Yes, it's a lot. I would say, and then I would love, Xava, to hear your answer to this question also, because it's a great question. For some, it depends on what text you're studying. For Torah and also for Talmud, I would say that Rashi is always a great place to start. And beyond that, you might start to learn who your favorites are. You know, you might happen to like, I love Orach Chaim. He just writes great commentaries and he often synthesizes what other people say. And so when I'm studying Torah, I often go to him. You might find your own favorites. Now, the people who comment on the Mishnah are different than the people who comment on the Torah, are different than some of the people who comment on the Talmud. So for each type of text you study, you kind of have to figure out who the go-to person or people are. And we can certainly help you get a handle on that. I would also say that clicking on the first verse of the first book of the first thing will always get you the most commentaries, right? So no other verse, I'm pretty sure, maybe the beginning of the 10 Commandments, but otherwise I'm almost certain that no other verse has 401 commentaries on it. Everyone likes to write on the beginning of things because that's their chance to introduce everything they have to say. And this is not just true of the Torah, it's true of every kind of literature commentary. So, you know, go a little further down, click on something, and then see who's out there, and you'll get a feel for who your favorites are. I don't know, Xava, how do you decide?
So let me, by way of answering this, I'll just talk about what my process is when I'm in xevruta. So I put it down to Hebrew because this is what it looks like when I study on Sefaria with a friend. And what I do is I do, you know, all my words. So let's say I go through all this Hebrew and I make sure I have, you know, just exactly a perfectly precise understanding of this. You know, imagine this is my first time studying this verse. And so I go through and I get my inside understanding, and then my xevruta and I get our outside understanding. We go through that whole process. So that oftentimes occupies my entire time period of study. And then if I have a little bit of extra time after that, Then I'll go to Rashi. Just like Rachel said, Rashi, I think, is a great place to start. And always, if I have more time in xevruta than just the text itself takes up, Rashi is the place that I go. And let's say it's my 6th or 7th or 10th or 90th time studying a text, then I'll just let myself get lost in all these different commentaries and pick and choose and explore what they all have to say. But for the most part, in my study practice, I tend to find that studying the text in depth plus a Rashi is usually takes up the time that I have to study that day. So that's my process, and I hope hearing about it is helpful.
Any other questions? I would say that for Mishnah study, since we are focusing on Mishnah, there isn't Rashi on Mishnah. There are two kind of workarounds for that. Rashi does commentary on almost the entire Talmud, and the Talmud includes the Mishnah. So if you really want to know what Rashi has to say about the Mishnah, you can find where it's located in the Talmud and find his commentary that way, but he doesn't comment on it as the Mishnah. The kind of, I'm hesitant to say this because they are so different, but the equivalent is kind of Bartanura is the go-to commentator, kind of classic commentator on the Mishnah, and is in Sefaria. Yes, that is Bartanura, who the wine is named after. And so that's a great place to go. The other, I didn't see it in Sefaria, though I may not have looked in the right place. But earlier I mentioned there is an app called Kahati. That is the full text of the Mishnah, and you can also read Pinchas Kahati's commentary. So there are two more contemporary commentators on the Mishnah that are considered really excellent. One is Kahati, the other is Albeck. I don't know of a digital Albeck, but Kahati is all available for free as an app for iOS and Android. And you can get Kahati's commentary that way. It's all in Hebrew, but it's in modern Hebrew for people who have more modern Hebrew skills and want to understand Mishnah with kind of a Rashi-esque commentary. All right, should I bring up the presentation?
Yeah, I think the next thing we had on the presentation was a demonstration of online Jastro, but I actually feel like you kind of did that in your resources slide, so we could go over it again, but
sorry.
I didn't realize that was going to happen, so.
That was my fault. I probably wasn't supposed to. Well, yes, so there is an online Jastro demonstration.
Yeah, I'll just say a couple words about it. You saw Rachel showed it earlier. If you want to use this instead of Sefaria, that's fine. The easiest way to navigate is that in this online Jastro, just like in a paper Jastro, there's a word at the top of each page. Ooh. And when you select one of the letters, it shows you the words at the top of each page. So that's the easiest way to pick what page you're going to want to go to. And so you'll want to pick a word that is alphabetically right before what you're trying to look up, probably, and that'll help you sort of zero in on what you're looking for. Other than that, it's pretty much just like a paper Jastro. In fact, I'm 99% sure it's a scan of a paper Jastro. So that's really all you need to know to use it. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Cool. Well, I think this is the end of our slides. So if it's our, big giant any questions before we depart from each other time. And I mean, we're gonna do a little cottage. We're gonna give you our emails and say what else is coming up. So it's not going to end it right now, but if there's any more questions on the subject matter.
All right. Oh, Max, you're raising your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, phone controls. I have the simplest of questions, which is just, could you forward the, like, if you still, like, I don't know, could you forward the chat history along with the slides if it's not too much trouble for those? Maybe just me.
I am going to do my best to save the chat. I have had problems with this on Zoom before, so I don't want to promise it, but I will promise to do my best.
That's okay. Your best is the best that I would ask for.
Perfect. And I'll be sending out a recording of this and the slides to anyone who registered. So if you didn't register in advance, that's totally fine. But if you want the slides, just send me an email or register after the fact. Either way, I will get your info and know to send it to you. I don't think there's any easy way for me to kind of save who is here right now and how to get things to you after the fact. All right. Well, just as we started with blessing, we are going to sanctify the end of our learning. Max, your hand is up. Is that just because I didn't lower your hand before? Or did you have another question?
Nope, it's because it was just
okay, I've lowered your
up.
hand. That was on me. All right. Just as we started out, excuse me, sanctifying our learning, we're going to end sanctifying our learning. It's traditional often to recite Kaddish de Rabbanan, the Kaddish of the rabbis, at the end of learning a piece of text. We are going to recite one line from that as a nod to the learning that we've done together. So just as before, you can either join in for the whole piece or you can give a hearty amen at the end. No, not, yeah, sure, why not? And amen at the end. Okay. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach Le'alam U'Almei Almaya. Let the great name be blessed from now until eternity.
Okay, it's our finale slide, which will probably be a little bit of a cooperative endeavor. But we are going, Rachel and I, is the we, I mean, Rachel and I will be teaching a Mishnah beit midrash starting this month. In fact, starting next week on this very same day of the week, Wednesday, on this very same time from 7:30 to 9-ish. And it's going to go on for 7 weeks, and we're going to study Mishnah Pesachim, which is sort of coming up in the Daf Yomi cycle and is all about the practices and discussions of Pesach, of Passover. So it's going to be super awesome. And maybe Rachel can say a little more about how to register.
Great. So if you are interested in dipping your toes into Mishnah study, all you need to know is your basic Aleph Bet, and we can take you from there. And if you know more than your basic Aleph Bet, we also have students who have done some Mishnah study before or some Talmud study before. And so we will work to pair you with a xevruta that works for you, and are looking forward to welcoming a range of backgrounds to the beit midrash. If you would like to register, you can go to this link and we'll send you the slides, so you can just click on the link when you get the slides, or you can also access the registration form from the Temple Emanu-El homepage. We're meeting Wednesday nights at 7:30. Starting next week, as Xava already said, on Zoom. It's a different Zoom link, though. You'll get the link when you register. If you have any problems with the form, you can also reach out to me. My email is here. Xava's email is also there, and you can email her as well.
Yeah, email me about just any old thing. Also, if you would like to join or experience the Shel Maala community, which is the online Talmud learning community that I help build and facilitate, you can join our Discord server or our Facebook group by following either one of these links. And again, the links will be in the slides, which we'll send out to you. Discord is just like this chat software. It's super cool, has all kinds of super cool features. And the Discord server is really active. So if you haven't experimented with Discord before, I strongly encourage you to, for the sake of Shel Maala. But if you want to do that, super fun. We'd love to have you. And you can follow either of those links. And I think that's all. I think that's all we have to say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to stick around for a few more minutes. And with that, I think we're gonna stop the recording, but feel free to stick around and ask questions, schmooze, however you would like.
Well, thank you very much.